Hi, everyone. Welcome to our bats, truths versus guano with Rob and Niver. I'm really excited that you could all come this evening. If you have any questions, at the bottom center of your screen, there is a question and answer category, and you can put your questions right in there. Let's see. If you could, in the chat box, please let me know how many people are at your screen. That would really help us for our keeping track. And without further ado, I'm going to turn everything over to Rob and Niver.
Thanks, Thea. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Talking about bats is something I love to do, so I can go on and on. I'm certainly willing to stay later than the hour to answer some questions. And I'll just get started by saying that I grew up in Claverick on Old Lane, just down the road from the old and new Claverick Library. So it's really fun to be able to give a talk. And so thank you, Thea, for giving me that opportunity. So, and I work in New York still, in Cortland, near Syracuse. And so this talk is going to be biased towards New York bat species and bats of the Northeast. If you've got questions, there are a couple other bats thrown in there, but if you've got questions about species that don't occur in New York that I can't answer, I can certainly follow up. And if you're really interested, and get you in touch with someone who can answer those questions. But this, I have to just be like upfront, this is going to be a little focused on New York. So I work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm not used to Zoom, so I hope that I can do this right. So we're not the New York State DEC, and so those of you who are from New York State, those are going to be the people that you are going to see more often out in the field, out on the ground. We work with them all the time. They're really great partners. They are a state agency, and I work for the Department of Interior for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'm just going to read our mission really quickly because I always like to start with that. I really believe in our mission, and it can help you understand where I'm coming from. And it's on the screen, so you can read it for yourself as well. But our mission is to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish and wildlife and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. So I work for all of you. You pay for my salary, a little tiny bit of your taxes. So thank you. And so I work for all the people of America, but I also work for the species. So thank you for allowing me to do what I do. I'm really proud to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just to give you an idea of how we're situated, we're across the entire country. We also do some work with foreign species, but I work in the Northeast. And I mentioned I work in the New York field office, which is in Cortland, which is just south of Syracuse. We have a whole variety of federally listed species in New York State that I have the great opportunity to work with and work for. Including freshwater mussels, plants, birds, turtles, snails. So just a really nice diversity, but tonight we're going to focus in on bats. So to get started, I have a couple of true-false questions. You can keep your own score. If I was in person, I could give a prize like chocolate. That's what I like to do at university talks, is throw candy at students so they'll actually engage with me. But I have no prize for you tonight, but you can be proud of yourself if you do well on this quiz. And I'm just going to run through them rather than having anyone raise their hands or shout out a question. You can just, score yourself. So, true or false, bats are flying mice? False. Bats are not rodents, and mice cannot fly. The most important thing to take away from this is that bats don't have multiple litters of babies. They have very low reproductive capacity, so completely different than the mice that might be in your basement or under your kitchen sink. The next question is, True or false, bats are blind? False. Bats have excellent eyesight. True or false, bats try to become tangled in your hair? False. Bats are curious, and so they certainly may fly around you if you're lucky enough to still have bats flying around you in your backyard in the summer, but they're highly unlikely to get in your hair. I do have a story that I have had a bat in my hair, but that is because I was in a cave doing a survey in the winter for bats to count them, and it was a very close quarters, and a bat climbed up onto my shoulder. We woke it up, and it actually just climbed up under my caving helmet and was just kind of trying to fall back asleep in a little safe place. But that is highly not normal. So one, we should not be frequenting caves in the winter when bats are trying to sleep. And two, in the summer, bats are just normally not going to get stuck in your hair. So don't worry about that. True or false? The fastest bat is faster than the fastest bird. True. So on the left are the Brazilian free-tailed bats, which have recently been clocked at about 99 miles per hour. And this is not diving flight like a peregrine. This is just horizontal flight. And the photo on the right is, I believe, the chimney swift. Shoot, now I forgot what bird it is. I think it's the common chimney swift, and that's only about 60 to 70 miles per hour. So bats faster than birds. Bats are vampires. False. Vampires are not real. Although I'm reading an excellent series about bats and witches that Thea can put you onto if you like to read about vampires. All bats are rabid. False. If you're in New York, we have a really great resource with the New York State Department of Health, the Wadsworth rabies lab, basically, or Wadsworth Health Center, but they do rabies work. And they have these annual summaries up to 2017 by species, what was submitted to them, and what percentage actually tested positive for rabies. They have monthly reports after that, all the way through August of last year. And so if you're curious, you can look and see for each county across the whole state, what species were submitted and what tested positive. And in New York, less than 3% annually of bats that are submitted for testing test positive. Something to keep in mind, just because it is a low percentage does not mean you should go out and handle bats with their bare hands. Always make sure you're wearing gloves, and that's for all mammals. All mammals, there's a risk of disease, including rabies. So this is not free reign to just go handle wildlife with your bare hands. But also I put the website link for Wadsworth down in the bottom left corner, but if it's too small and you're really interested, we can get that to you. True or false? Bats are the only true flying unaided mammals. So here's a picture of some potentially flying mammals: dolphins, flying squirrels, and humans. but none of these are true flyers. So bats are the only true flying mammals. So that's your quiz. Hopefully you all did well and already know a lot about bats, but hopefully you also learned something tonight. And I don't know if my mom ended up joining on this or not, but I'm going to throw her out. I'm going to call her out that she does not like bats. And after all these years of me working on bats, she still does not like bats. So if I can convince her someday to like bats, and if you all have a little fear of bats, if I can convince you to just like them a little bit better tonight, or at least not kill them, then I've done my job. So we're going to get into some bat basics. Bats are primarily nocturnal, and so that means they're active at night. Do not be alarmed if you see a bat during the day. It does not automatically mean that something's wrong with them, but primarily they're going to be active at night. In addition to having excellent eyesight, they have this really great ability. It's really cool to use echolocation to help them navigate at night. So that is basically they're emitting high frequency sound waves out of their nose and mouth, and echoes are bouncing back from whatever is in front of them. So whether it's a moth or a tree or a house. And so that is another tool that they have to capture their prey and to avoid colliding into things in the dark. Just to give you an idea of that level of high frequency that bats are calling at, we don't generally hear them as humans, especially if we're getting older and we're losing the high frequency ability to hear sounds of higher and higher frequencies as we get older. But you can see in the green, or I don't know if you're colorblind, but this larger bar is the human hearing range. And we overlap just slightly with bat calls, but primarily they're a higher frequency bat call. You'll often hear a, I don't know if you can hear that, but a clicking. It's not really a bat call, but you can hear that sometimes if you have a barn with little browns or big browns. Sometimes during the day you can hear that noise. So we can hear some of the noises that we make, but we can't generally hear most of the calls that they make. So what do bats eat? 70% of all bat species are insectivores, so that means they eat insects. All of the species in New York only eat insects, and it's a wide variety of insects. Yes, they can eat mosquitoes, absolutely, but there's not a lot of nice fatty body to a mosquito, so they're like kind of a little snack. A nice fat moth is going to give them a lot more energy, but basically whatever they can fit in their mouth is what a lot of our bats are eating. Some bats are pollinators. Some bats eat fruit. Some are carnivorous or eat fish. This one's eating a frog. But all of our bats in New York eat insects. I did want to highlight vampire bats because I often get questions about them. There are 3 species of vampire bats. They do not occur in the US. They're in Central and South America. They do not suck blood. They nibble and lick or lap up blood that drips out of the wound. And they only eat about a tablespoon per meal. They are highly social and they share their meals with each other. And something that might be horrific to some of you if you're afraid of them, but they can run on their thumbs and leap. But they can also fly, but none of our bats do that. They're all flying bats only in New York. And I just have to say, these are adorable. They're adorable. So if you like margaritas, you can thank bats. So this is the lesser long-nosed bat pollinating an agave plant. And so agave is the source of tequila. And so this is one of those bats totally covered in pollen. They're not usually yellow. So they have to have these agave plants. And so not all agave is grown in a way that allows the plants to flower. And so you can actually help support and conserve these bats by buying tequila where the farmers agree to let a certain proportion of the agave plants get to the point where they have those nice flowers and are available for the bats to feed. So that's the Tequila Interchange Project. And I think Tequila Ocho is one of the ones that you can find more easily. But anyways, if you like margaritas, you might as well do it in a way that helps the bat. There's around 1,400 species of bats in the world and about 45 species in the US. These are all bats inside a cave. And there's quite a diversity, not in just what they eat, but also in their size. So on the left is a little bumblebee bat, which weighs as much as 2 M&Ms, not peanut M&Ms even, plain M&Ms. I mean, just see how tiny that is. And then on the right is an example of a flying fox. So there's several species of flying fox, but their wingspans can get as tall as me. So I'm 5'5", maybe 5'4", sorry, I'm 5'4". And so they're taller than me, their wingspans. And just look how amazingly gorgeous they are. I know, I just think bats are amazing, So how many bat species are in New York? out of that 45 in the US. We have 9. They are all small. None of them are anywhere close to a flying fox size. Ours are 7 to 14, maybe 20 grams, but very small. So wingspan, maybe if you spread out your hand, that'll be the size of little browns and Indianas. So we've got tiny guys and girls in New York. So these are all of them that we have right now. And of those 9, 6 of them hibernate and 3 of them migrate south. So I mentioned all of our bats eat insects. And in the winter in New York, we do not have insects readily available. So these bats only have those 2 options. They either need to hibernate or they need to migrate. So we have these 6 species on the left are all the ones that go underground, primarily in abandoned caves or mines in the winter. And the ones on the right, the red bat, silver-haired, and hoary, those are the ones that migrate south. So where do bats in New York live? Trees, they're highly associated with trees. They might be in little clusters of leaves, under loose bark, in the leaf litter. It all depends on what species you're talking about, but most of them are highly associated with trees. We also have some that use rock piles, talus slopes. These are some pictures of documented roost trees that we tracked Indiana bats to. These are primarily in Dutchess County, but you can see this one's not that far away from someone's house, and it's from a road, an old black locust. And then there's things like red maple swamps. I don't know what this one with dead elms. So houses, barns, and other buildings can also be important habitat, and that's mostly for 2 species in New York, little brown bats and big brown bats. And at this point, if you have a colony of bats in your barn or maybe in your attic, it's most likely to be big brown bats because of the declines that we've had in little brown bats, but there are still some little brown bat populations out there. So I mentioned that we have 6 species that go underground in the winter. And so it's caves, abandoned mines. This is a little northern long-eared bat tucked up in a little hole. Just to get into a little bit about their biology. So a baby bat, I think I may have said the word already, is called a pup. And they have a maximum of 1 to 2 pups per year. So not those litters and not multiple litters. They have the 1 chance and they have 1 to 2 pups per year. A lot of our species only have a maximum of 1. And then there's at least 1 species, well, 2 that have twins more frequently. They give birth during June or July, and you can see these little guys cannot fly at that time. They're completely dependent on their moms to carry them from roost to roost. The moms go out and eat insects, come back and nurse. So they're just really dependent for at least a month until when they can fly. That's called volant. So how do we study bats? In the winter, I mentioned that I was in a cave trying to count bats. And so that is something that we can do for some species to get a handle on how many we have. And so our standard practice is to go into a site 1 day every other year. We go in, we take photographs, and we get out. So we try to be as fast as possible. Then, and these are mostly organized, actually they're all organized, sorry, by the New York State DEC in New York. So DEC organizes these, leads these, and Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners helps out. And so some species like Indiana bats and little brown bats, which there's a combination of those 2 species in this picture, cluster really nicely right on the face of the wall. You can go in, take pictures, go back to your computer, and then put little dots on each of their noses and then count how many you have of each species. Some species, like the northern long-eared bat, like I showed you, tuck back into holes and crevices, and so we do not have great counts of those from year to year. Other species kind of hang out singly, and we can get pictures of them, but our counts have really been focused on Indiana bats because they're one of our endangered species. So why do we limit our time counting bats? Because they need to make it through the whole winter with whatever fat they put on the prior fall. Because if they try to go out and eat in the winter, again, there's no bugs for them. So they need to live off those fat reserves that entire winter period. So we really don't want to go in and disturb them and have them wake up and burn off more of their fat. So we try to be really careful about limiting the number of times that we go in, and only going in because we're trying to figure out what's going on with the status of these species. In the summer, we've got a whole host of tools available to study bats. We can put up nets and try to capture them. We can put little tiny radio transmitters on them after we capture them and then track them to their roost trees. This bat has a band on it as well. So we can put a band on it in case we ever are lucky enough to recapture it again. We can find out movement patterns. This picture down in the lower right is a bat detector. So we can record the calls that bats are making and tell different species apart as they're flying and foraging through an area. So and there's infrared photography to help count bats as they're exiting colonies, like barns. So we've got a whole host of tools and ways to study bats in the summer. So what bats are protected by the Fish and Wildlife Service in New York? We have two, the Indiana bat on the left and the northern long-eared bat on the right. Oops. And this is just to show you their range. They occur across the eastern half of the US, primarily the northeastern half. And they're not all across New York. They're along the Lake Champlain Valley, the Hudson Valley, and fewer and fewer locations along the Lake Plains. We mostly have them left around Watertown in northern New York. And then here's the northern long-eared bat. It's got a larger range, goes up into Canada. And all of New York used to have northern long-eared bats. Pretty much any net that you put up before white nose syndrome, which I'll talk about in a minute, you could catch a northern long-eared bat. We called them trash bats. So just a little bit about what they're doing throughout the year. In the fall, they mate. They eat enough to store that fat that I mentioned. It's really important for them to get through hibernation. So they're staying pretty close to their hibernation sites, which are called hibernacula. They might go out 5, maybe up to 20 miles away, but they're staying pretty close to those winter sites in the fall. Then they go into hibernation. It's not true hibernation. They are going through what's called torpor. So they'll slow down their metabolism for maybe 2 weeks and then wake up, get a drink of water, urinate, defecate, maybe mate, kickstart their immune system, and then they go back into torpor. So they're doing, every time they wake up, they're burning through a little bit of their fat. And so we don't want to increase the number of times that they're waking up. In the spring, they come out of the caves and the mines. They are skinny bats then. They burn through most of their fat. They're going to forage and then migrate to their summer grounds. They also become pregnant at that time. So it's a delayed pregnancy. They mate in the fall or in the winter. And in the summer, I mentioned they're associated with trees and they form these colonies. So larger groups of females get together to raise their young together. And so I mentioned they only have up to 1 pup per female per year. And the baby bats are flying about a month after they're born. And their home ranges are not huge. So a home range is how far, your daily activity patterns are across your active season. So your home range might be your house, where you go to work, where you go get your food at your grocery store, kind of your normal patterns. Indiana bats are generally staying within about 2.5 miles. They can certainly go further from their roosts, and northern long-eared bats only about 1.5 miles from their roosts. So not huge home ranges. This is the counts of the Indiana bat across its entire range, just to give you an idea of how many bats we're actually talking about. And so in 2007, right before this red bar, when white nose syndrome was first discovered, we had around 664,000 Indiana bats across the entire range. In 2019, our last winter count, we had around 537,000. So we've lost around 130,000, or around 20% range wide of this species since 2007. And those declines are even more steep, even steeper in the Northeast, where we've had this disease much longer on the landscape than as it's moved west. And I have an image of that. And you don't need to worry about the numbers on this graph or anything, but just look at the big red part of the pie. 34% of all Indiana bats across the entire range are in one site in the winter. So out of those 537,000 bats, 34% of them, a third of them, are in just one site in the winter. It's a really, really important site. But you can see that 10% are in 213 other sites. So most of our bats, 90% of them, are concentrated in about 10 sites across the US. So all those 10 sites are really important. I mean, it's just amazing how concentrated we're left with where these bats are in the winter. If that didn't make sense, put that as a question because I can go back to it. So what bats are under consideration for protection by the Fish and Wildlife Service that also occur in New York? We're looking at two, the little brown bat on the left and the tricolored bat on the right. So what that means is we are taking a look across the entire range at how these species are doing and whether we think they're at risk of extinction now or in the foreseeable future. And so we're taking a look at those two species right now. So what might hurt bats? Certainly disturbance or vandalism in winter, anything that you're going in and disturbing them, I already mentioned, but unfortunately, some people have targeted bats and actually gone in and intentionally hurt them in the winter because it's really easy to impact them because they're just asleep right there on the wall. Summer habitat loss or degradation. So when the bats come back out of their hibernation site in the winter, they need to come back to available habitat for them to raise their young. And so this can be a concern, losing this forest habitat. Insect declines, whether it's associated with insecticides or other causes, is something that we don't have a really good handle on, but it's a potential cause for concern. But again, we don't have a great deal of information on this for bats right now. Collision with wind turbines is definitely a factor. Some species appear to be affected much more than others. Our migratory bats, reds, hories in particular, there's much more of them that are being killed by spinning wind turbine blades than some of our other species. But it's only the spinning blades that they are colliding with. So when the blades are off, there is no collision risk. So there are ways that you can minimize this collision risk and minimize these fatalities by determining when are the best times to operate the turbines and turn them off. And I mentioned white nose syndrome. Hopefully everyone is familiar with this since it's been on the scene since 2007, and New York was unfortunately the epicenter of the disease in the US. White nose syndrome is a fungal disease. So it's like athlete's foot, except it kills you. So it's caused by a fungus called Pseudogenoascus destructans. So we call it PD because that's a lot to say every time you want to talk about this fungus. It also occurs in Europe and Asia, and it wasn't here before. So it's new to North America. It was brought over here by someone or something. And so our bats, it was new to them. Does this sound very similar to something like COVID-19 for humans? So these bats had no resistance. And so millions of bats have died from white nose syndrome. So why are bats dying? From a fungal infection. They're waking up and grooming the fungus and burning through their fat. That's one source. There's no insects to eat in the middle of the winter. The fungus actually eats through their wing. And so there's significant wing damage. So it makes it very difficult to fly. And there are some other physiological effects that are also happening, dehydration. So there's a whole host of things that are happening that are killing these bats. Why is it called white nose syndrome? In the caves, bats often, but not always, have this fluffy white fungus on their noses. In later years, when the disease has been present for a long time, you often don't have quite that fungal bloom. But this was some of the initial, this was the first picture that Nancy Hayslip took from DEC with that fluffy white fungus on the nose or on the muzzle. But like a cat, bats groom themselves. So they groom the fungus off. And so you're not going to see bats flying around in the summer with white noses. And so if you have a bat in your house in the summer and, you need to gently get it out of your house, which I'll talk about at the end, you're not going to see signs of the fungus. And it does not mean that it was not impacted by white nose syndrome. So I just have 2 slides to show the progression. So I mentioned it was first discovered in New York in Schoharie County at Howe's Cave. And there are a couple of sites that year. And I'm sorry, I keep losing the arrow. And now in 2019, it's in 33 states and 7 Canadian provinces. And so you can see the colors just show kind of the progression. The blues were the first years, then the greens, yellows, reds. So it's across most of the US at this point. These counties are the winter locations. And so you can actually envision that the effects of white nose syndrome are filled in all throughout here. Because these bats are going places in the summer. And I mentioned that white nose is in Europe and Asia, so we are learning more about how have bats in countries in those areas been affected, and what can we expect for our bats in the future? They're different species of bats. And my dogs are starting to bark because my husband just got home. So you might hear a little barking. So I apologize. I can't do anything about that. So all 9 of our cave and mine hibernating bats are affected by white nose syndrome in New York. These migratory bats are not facing the same challenges as our hibernating bats in terms of white nose syndrome. So these are the ones, these 6 that are just there, with nothing that they can do with the disease impacting them, versus these guys awake and flying about in the winter, with plenty of insects available to eat. So the impacts by species have varied. Some species have been impacted as much as 99% decline, like the northern long-eared bat. And species like big brown bat and small-footed bat have had lesser degrees of decline, but they've all been impacted. So you may have heard stories about a cure. And this, you don't have to worry about reading all the details. This is just to show there's a lot of research going on in terms of treatments. there is no cure. um, there is hope for maybe having some treatment options for some species. And there's a lot of interest and funding and people out there trying to find a way to at least minimize impacts of white nose syndrome. There needs to be the lab trials and then the field trials. And so really at this point, there's nothing that is, that I can say, yes, this is it. This is what we need to minimize impacts from white nose. So why care? Hopefully you already care, but bats help people. So they eat insect pests that cost farmers and foresters lots of money. I mentioned they eat mosquitoes, maybe not their primary food of choice, but yes, they do eat them. Some of the bats that occur in other countries pollinate or disperse seeds. So many of your favorite foods rely on bats. And, you know, the Navy and a whole variety of agencies research bats to learn more about aerodynamics, and it's just really cool. So people, agencies, researchers are looking at bats to help them develop things like robots and drones. So there's a lot that we can learn, not just from bats, but from all of our wildlife. So what can you do to help? I mentioned my main goal was to have you not kill bats. That's my primary goal. So if you have bats in your house, work with a trained nuisance wildlife control operator to remove bats from buildings. If at all possible, wait to exclude bats until after pups can fly, because otherwise you're just going to be left with dying bats in your house when the moms can't get back to them. And please don't use sticky traps in barns or attics where bats are roosting. That's just a terrible way for them to die. You can help maintain forest. You can learn more about bats in your area and white nose syndrome and teach others about bats. Stay out of caves in the winter. Support your local nature centers and land trusts and other natural areas. And what about bat houses? I have this X, and that, just in case you didn't see it, that's a bat house on a tree. So that's not a great location for a bat house. You want a bat house to be somewhere where there's going to get lots of sun and it's high enough that bats can exit and enter freely. Bat houses are really most useful in situations where you're excluding bats from a barn or a house and they need somewhere else to go. If you don't have that situation and you just put a bat house up, which is fine, there might be enough other suitable habitat around that bats are never going to need your bat house. So just the best time, again, is if you need to get bats out of a building, to put up a bat house for them so they have another option. And ideally put it up the season before you're going to exclude them so they can start to explore it. Also, this is a really, really tiny bat house. So it's not ideal. What if you find dead or injured bats? If you're in New York, contact the New York State Department of Health. I think at this point, they really recommend you just contact the county health department and see if they're interested in the dead bat. And you can contact, if it's a live injured bat, the DEC local regional office for a list of rehabbers that can take it in. I'm wondering, I don't know if I mentioned what to do if you want to get a bat out of your house. So if you have a live bat and you need to get it out of your house, glove up. And if it's just roosting and something doesn't seem quite right with it, glove up and put it in a container. And again, you can call your health department and see if they're interested in obtaining it for rabies testing. And if they're not, you can put it outside, higher up on some vegetation so that a cat or something isn't going to get it. But if it's flying around, then you want to just close off all the doors in that one room and open a window, and eventually it should find its way out. So you don't want to just take tennis rackets or blankets and throw things at it. Ideally, if you can just contain it and open a window and help it just find its way out, that's the most humane way that you can get a bat out of your house. Certainly having bats in your area where you're dwelling is not a situation where you want to be, but having it up in your attic or in a barn, that often works out just fine for people. In case there are questions about COVID-19 and bats, I just have one slide. I highly recommend, if you have questions, just go to the CDC website. This is a screenshot right off of their website today. I just wanted to mention a couple of their bullets really quickly. There's no evidence that animals are playing a significant role in spreading the virus that causes COVID-19 to people. There's no need to go out and kill bats in your house or anywhere else because you're worried that they're spreading the virus to you. More studies are needed to understand if we can actually spread the virus to animals. There have been some cases that you've probably seen in the news, but I don't have a lot of information to share on this, but CDC is the appropriate site for you. And so I just wanted to let you know that there is a resource. There are several pages. One's about COVID-19 and livestock. One's about COVID-19 and pets. So in case you weren't aware of that, they are addressing those topics right on their website. And so that's all I have. And oh good, I talk a lot. And so I actually left enough time for questions. So Thea, I'm gonna let you kind of run that.
Hold on 1 second. Let me cancel the spotlight. Hi. Okay, so there are some questions. I think what I'll do first is I'll just read the questions we have, and then at the very end, I'll open it up in case people think of more questions to ask them. So it looks like someone, Peter, has some questions about bats and his residence. It's a pretty long, can you see the questions and answers, Robin, at the bottom?
Hold on.
If you go to the bottom, there's a Q&A.
Okay.
That might be easier because that was a really long one.
I can, okay.
Oh, super.
So if everyone can see, everyone can read along and see Peter's question. Oh, also, if any of my Fish and Wildlife Service colleagues joined and I said anything that was not factual, please correct me because we do not want anyone to go away with something that's not true. And I don't mind being corrected. You're not welcome to just heckle me at this point, but if you have corrections, please chime in on those. Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to read this really quick, Peter. Oh, so Peter has a colony. It's very exciting. I don't know if you're excited yet. Hold on. You can't use this side of the bit. Okay. Okay. This is a great question. So Peter wants to know how to get him out of his garage because it's open. There's really not a great way because they like it. So, I mean, the best thing you can do is give a wildlife nuisance control officer a call and see if they have any suggestions. But really, it's making whatever is ideal for them not ideal. So it's changing the structure of your garage in a way so that it doesn't have great little crevices and cozy spots for the bats to go. And it's great that you already have a bat box up for them to, so this is like perfect, but you need to make your garage unsuitable for them. So looking at where they're using those areas in your garage, figuring out how can you flatten them, how can you make them tarp it, what can you do just to make it so that it's not what those bats are looking for. And you're in Ghent. Do your bats go to the Adirondack caves to hibernate during the winter months? They certainly could. So Indiana bats that we've tracked from up in Essex County, Warren County, in the summer mainly go over to Vermont. So they're using that Lake Champlain Valley. But there are lots of caves around the eastern New York and spreading out into western New York. So I don't know where your bats are coming from, but there are some larger caves also in Ulster County. And so that's where a lot of the Indiana bats are coming from that go to Dutchess and Orange and Columbia County. So your bats could be, I really don't know. They could be coming from any of those locations. There's hibernation sites, hibernacula in Albany and Schoharie County. So they could be coming from there. Do ultrasonic repelling systems work? I have no idea. I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else knows. So if anyone else knows the answer to that question, you can chime in.
They can raise their hand and if there's
Thank
someone who knows the answer.
Do bats always return to the same roost during the summer? I didn't mention that. So maybe not the same exact roost, but often, yes, the same exact roost. So we call that high site fidelity or philopatry. So yes, they do. Whether it's a tree or a barn, they're going back to their same areas every year as long as it's still suitable. Yep. What eats bats? Not a lot. An owl, a smart raccoon that discovers a hole in the ground with bats flying out of it, or other birds of prey. When you have really large populations of bats, like, I don't know if any of you have been to Austin looking at the bats underneath Congress Bridge. When there's just hundreds of thousands of bats coming out, that's a great picnic for raptors. We don't have that situation in New York, but so not a lot eats bats, but cats can get savvy and find a hibernation site. Raccoons in the summer can find them, but not a ton eats bats. The normal lifespan of a bat, it depends on species. Some can live as long as 30 years. You know, the average in the wild is probably 7 to 11 years for a lot of our species. Get the same 5 bats. You might have the same 5 bats. Isn't that sad? It's only 5 bats. But I'm glad you have some bats. Do lights in the attic repel bats? Like if you left them on all the time? I don't know. I mean, if it's a nice cozy spot for them and then I don't know that lights are really going to deter them too much. In the pie chart, was that just Indiana bat? Yes. And I can go back to that picture, but yes, it was just Indiana bat that is concentrated at one site in Missouri in terms of the range-wide population. A book or a website with plans for a bat house? Yes, Bat Conservation Management is a great website. They can actually help install bat houses, but they also have some ideas, and I think they sell some of their boxes too. Bat Conservation International is another one. To where do they migrate? So I'm going to confess here, I do not work a lot on the migrating bats. I work mostly on our cave species. So our silvers, reds, and hories go south, but I have to, like, I don't know. I should know that, but I don't. So I can get back to you on that chinchilla, or I can get back to Thea on that.
You can post it on the website or Facebook.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we can do a little, I can add it to the discussion of this. So I apologize. I have not focused on that particular question. What can I do to attract more than the one bat I see in the summer? There's not a lot that we can do right now, unfortunately, because our bat populations are really low in New York. If you have good habitat around you, forest, you know, there's more habitat available than there are bats right now. You could try the bat house, but again, that's not really, it's kind of like a nice thing you can try, but the likelihood of a bat using it, if there's lots of other good habitat nearby, is not going to be that great. So sorry, it's not a satisfying answer, but there's not a lot that we can do besides try not to hurt them further. What's wrong with having bats in the garage? It's nothing. Except, you know, if you don't want guano poop on your stuff all the time. So, but I mean, plenty it's a personal choice. Some people are fine with bats in their barn and in their garage or even in their attic, and other people do not want that. So it's really just a personal choice. But there's not like a big health risk to have bats somewhere near you. Again, in your dwelling, you don't really want that. You don't want them actively using where you are sleeping and things like that. But if it's separate from that, you're fine. Has white nose syndrome reached all hibernacula in New York State? Yep. Yes. We have a maternity colony in Little Brown. Oh, that's exciting. And your numbers are increasing. Oh yes. So around July, you're seeing the babies. Yep. Cuton. Can people catch the fungus? Okay. When bats started dying back in 2007, we had no idea what was killing them. Was it a virus? Was it so? And so we were really cautious about entering sites just for our own personal health as well. And once we figured out what it was, there's been no issues of people catching any sort of disease from the bats, from white nose syndrome. So they're actively studied in a whole variety of settings, in labs, in the field, and no, there's no concern about getting white nose syndrome from the bats. And what about the feces? Well, I mean, it's kind of gross to have a lot of bat poop, maybe. People use it to fertilize gardens. So, you can use it if you'd like. But it's just like any other mammal poop. You generally don't want to like lick it or anything if you have small children. But there's nothing special about bat poop that you should be afraid about versus other mammal poop. Are there any bats left in Canadian rattlesnake area caves? I don't know where the Canadian rattlesnake area caves are. Canadian, where is that?
This person, I think, is the same one who wants to talk. So I'm going to let her talk and ask the question and clarify. And then I do have some more questions in the chat.
All right.
Okay, Wendy, I think I've unmuted you. So you might have to unmute yourself.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, I didn't necessarily want to talk, but hi, Robin. I talked to you this summer about the pine bush. The bats are up here on across from Queechee Lake. I can't think of the name of the road. I should know this. It'll come to me in a minute. Yeah, it's they call them like the rattlesnake caves.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but if anybody from DEC is on, feel free to answer that. We generally have bats left in a lot of our sites, but they're really, really small numbers in a lot of cases.
I know they closed it off. People can't go in there.
Yeah, so there probably still are bats. It's just that the numbers are a lot lower than they used to be.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So a question in the chat is, can you talk more about bat houses and how much of a contribution they can make in the Hudson Valley area and how to maintain them for a healthy environment for bats?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to make a huge contribution unless you're trying to evict them from somewhere else for the most part, because we do have lots of great forest available in many areas in the Hudson Valley. One other place where they come in handy, I guess I could say, is if there was a forest that was regenerating and it had a lot of small trees and not a lot of big roosting trees yet. Sometimes we put bat boxes up or other kind of structures to kind of jumpstart the area for having places for the bats to actually roost. So, and there are these artificial slabs of bark that go on big poles. So it's kind of like a fake tree, like a fake shagbark hickory. So it's not a bat box, but it's a roosting structure. So we'll sometimes use that in areas, again, where there's like more young trees and not a lot of really older flabby bark trees for bats to go. So those are like the times when bat boxes are most helpful. And was there a follow-up?
Nope, I think that was,
Or was it just about bat boxes?
yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. I think that's the only, all the questions in the chat where they had moved them over to the question and answer.
Okay.
But I can, if anybody wants to ask a question verbally, they can just raise their hand and then I'll know to open it up. So there was a request that maybe afterwards we can put some of the links you talked about, we can share them later on the website so people would have information.
Sure.
Oh, here we go. I'm allowing Julie to talk.
Sorry, you may have covered this. Hi, Robin. Hi, Thea. You may have covered this at the beginning. I was a few minutes late, but what's your background? I mean, did you, you're a specialist in bats, and I'm kind of curious about how you got into that and your education and your story.
Okay. I'm not a specialist in bats, but I work a lot with bats, but I also work a lot with a snail and a butterfly and a moth, and so we get an opportunity to work with a whole bunch of species with the Fish and Wildlife Service, so it's really fun. But I went to ESF, SUNY ESF, which is a state school at Syracuse University for my bachelor's, and then went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for my master's and studied piping plovers. It's just a little cute shorebird on the Missouri River, and started with the Fish and Wildlife Service out there in South Dakota, and was able to come back to New York State to our field office here. So I've been with the Fish and Wildlife Service for 21 years, and I love it. And I love to share what I work on with people that are interested. So thank you for coming tonight.
There is another question in the question and answer. Where do fox bats live?
Oh, we have some in the Mariana Islands. I might not be saying that the right way, but they're in the tropics. So they're fruit-eating bats. So there's some in Asia. They're in a whole variety of countries, but think about really tropical environments.
A hand went up. Oh, Julie again. Oop. I think she and I are both doing the unmute at the same time.
Sorry, I'm so curious. Like, were you, Robin, always interested in wildlife when you were young, when you were going to school and stuff? Like, what made you decide to get into that?
So my aunt worked for the New York State DEC. So I was exposed to her bringing things home sometimes when we were visiting her, which was really cool. But no, I was just interested in like recycling, and I wanted to do something good for the world. I yelled at my friends in high school for throwing things out the car window, that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to do something. I didn't know what I wanted to do until my undergrad, when I got to start taking some of the classes and being exposed to what some of the opportunities were. So no, I didn't naturally know that I was going to do wildlife stuff. And also I was afraid of bats when I was young. So it's not like anything like I naturally knew I was going to work on bats by any means. I just thought they were cool flying around at night when you threw a ball up in the air and they came down and after you. But I definitely didn't think I was ever going to like be in a cave, like with them crawling up in my helmet. Like that.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a couple more questions here. Do bats recognize each other? If yes, how?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to learn about that. But yes, I mean, they communicate with each other. There's more research into their verbalizations with their colony mates. But I mean, they're highly social, and they find each other from the winter. They're in different winter locations, and I'm talking about Indiana bats here right now. They're in different winter locations, and they find each other back on the summer grounds again. I mean, it's just, it's really impressive. So I can't really, I've never really, I don't study how bats talk to each other or anything, but I know that there are people that are doing that, and we have a lot more to learn. But yes, there's something going on that that these bats definitely are interacting with each other in a way that suggests that they know each other. And actually, I was reading about vampire bats, and there are some studies that vampire bats share their meals with their friends and their family, and not just another random vampire bat. So I thought that was kind of cool. So there are definitely people that are like researching that topic with some specific species.
And what species of bats are known to hibernate in Columbia County?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if we have any hibernating sites in Columbia County. But all of the 9 species of bats in New York can absolutely occur in Columbia County at the different times of year. So in terms of what hibernates there, I would actually have to pull up my map to see if there's even a cave that's still kind of considered an active hibernacula in Columbia County. But there are plenty of other hibernacula nearby. So I don't know the answer to that question. So we can have that as one of the ones that I can look up, Thea.
Super, thanks. Well, thank you. Someone did ask if we were recording this, and we did record it, and we could put it up on our website for anybody who missed parts or wants to receive parts of the talk. Yep, there is one more question, and then it is 7. So are municipalities or wind farms mandated to provide for bat safety by law? For example, turning off at night or during migration, etc.
Okay, so under the Endangered Species Act, federal law, no one is authorized to take an endangered or threatened species without a permit. So we work with municipalities and wind companies and agencies to try to minimize impacting listed species. In terms of the non-listed species, there's no federal law saying that they cannot be harmed. Some species are listed by the state of New York that are not listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so then the New York state laws and regulations come into play. And then some local governments have their own step down laws as well and policies in terms of what they think is important for protection. But we work with, I mean, that's one of my primary duties, is to work with the public and agencies and applicants to try to come up with ways for them to get their projects done in ways that don't also hurt endangered species.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for this. This is really fun. And yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone.